Welcome to the first full day of Climate Assembly UK. It's the first time you've all been in the room together, and looking around, one of the things that's so exciting about Climate Assembly UK is that together you are representative of the UK population. And what we mean by that is that together you reflect the UK population in terms of your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your educational qualifications, where in the UK you live, whether you live in an urban or rural area, and how concerned you are, if at all, about climate change. We want to thank you very, very much for travelling from all parts of the UK to be here, and we hope that Climate Assembly UK is going to be a fantastic experience for you. My name's Sarah, and I'm one of the facilitation team that's going to guide you through the Assembly. We're going to explain more about that in a minute, but I'm going to start today by giving you a thorough introduction to Climate Assembly UK. So, about the Assembly then. So the first thing is that Climate Assembly UK is a citizens' assembly. So what is a citizens' assembly? So a citizens' assembly is an event or events that bring people together from all walks of life to have a say on an issue. So in this case, climate change. It does that by allowing you to learn about the issue, to discuss it in depth with one another, and then to reach recommendations about what you think should happen. Citizens' assemblies are being used with increasing regularity by governments and parliaments around the world to give them an idea of what the public's preferences are about issues that matter to everyone. So why is this particular citizens' assembly happening? Well, in June last year, the UK government and parliament agreed a new climate change target for the UK. It was to do what we call reach net zero emissions by 2050. If you're not clear on what that means yet, don't worry, because the first panel today is going to go through that in some detail for you. But the point is there was a new climate change target in June last year. And in the same month, in June, 6 select committees of the House of Commons commissioned Climate Assembly UK to find out the public's preferences about how we reach that net zero by 2050 target. So, not many people are familiar with select committees, but to explain that to you, a select committee is a cross-party group of MPs, so MPs from lots of different parties, and they focus on particular themes. So you have a select committee on transport, for example, a select committee on science and technology. And although when you see Parliament on TV, it's often Prime Minister's question time and it's in the chamber, actually select committees do a lot of the work of Parliament. And part of that is about holding the government to account. So looking at what the government's doing, seeing what they think of that, whether it's working, and making recommendations. They also run their own inquiries, so proactively identifying topics on which that they think need looking into and making recommendations about those. So they commissioned this Citizens' Assembly, those 6 select committees, and they've asked it to do a very specific thing, which is to look at how the UK should meet its target of net zero emissions by 2050. That's what they want to find out, so this new target. So how is that going to work? As you know, we're meeting over 4 weekends. So today's weekend, or this weekend, is going to be about introducing you to climate change in a thorough way and some of the overarching ethical and practical questions about how we get to net zero. We're going to do that all together for the most part. Next weekend, or second weekend, it's obviously not next weekend, you all know that, right? But the second weekend of the Assembly is going to be slightly different. We're going to break into 3 groups for quite a lot of the weekend, and we're going to look at 3 topics in more detail. So one is how we travel, so around transport. One is in the home, so how we use energy and heat in the home. And the other one is other group will look at 2 overlapping topics, so around what we buy and land use, food and farming. Now, I don't know how you feel about those topics, but having seen some of the material for them already, they are all really interesting, and I hope you're going to enjoy them a lot. In weekend 3, you're going to continue to discuss those topics and reach some decisions on them. And in weekend 4, we're going to come back all together and look at issues including where our energy comes from and reach your final recommendations. So I know some people yesterday were saying, well, what about if I want the Assembly to discuss issues that's not currently on this plan? Well, around the room, there are 2 big pieces of paper that say what about on them. So there's one just there, and I think there's one just at the back there. Now, that's what they're for. If during the Assembly today you're thinking, well, I'd really like us to talk about this topic, but we haven't got time to do it today, or it's not been covered in what I've just said, that's what they're for. Write your thought on what you'd like the Assembly to discuss on a post-it and stick it on those signs, please. There is time on the last weekend for us to discuss specifically what you want to discuss. So we'll just collect everything up over the course of the other weekends so that we can look at it then. There may also be earlier opportunities as well. So that's what to do. So what will happen once you've reached your recommendations? So firstly, we're going to write it all up into a detailed report and present that to Parliament at around the end of April. It's really important to say that when we do that, we say things like, the Assembly recommended that, and some Assembly members thought this and some Assembly members thought that. We never say this particular person thought this, right? So it's entirely anonymous. And the point of it is that when Climate Assembly UK was commissioned, the select committees wanted to use it to inform their work in holding government to account about how we reach the net zero target. But just because it was commissioned for that purpose doesn't mean that it won't have wider impacts. So we've already had one of the key government ministers on record this week saying that they're really looking forward to seeing what this Assembly considers and to reading the recommendations. Those of you who were in the same room as me last night heard Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Committee on Climate Change, which is the government's official advisor on climate change, saying how keen they are to see what you recommend and how interested they are in it. So even though it was commissioned for Parliament, and that's the primary purpose, it doesn't mean it isn't going to have wider influence. And in fact, the indications are at the moment that a lot of people are very interested in what you are doing. So just so you know what's happening, who is running Climate Assembly UK? So the UK Parliament has asked 3 organisations to run Climate Assembly UK for them. So the first one is, they're all not-for-profit, I should say that. The first one is the Sortition Foundation. They were responsible for finding you. So, for example, they helped Parliament draft the letters that you received in the post and that kind of thing. The second one is My Society. They built our website. I don't know if you've seen that, but that's what they did. And then there's the Involve Foundation, or Involve. So that's who I work for. Quite a few of the facilitation team work for Involve. And we're a public participation charity, and we specialise, among other things, in designing and running citizens' assemblies. So we're responsible for these weekends. We're also responsible for liaising with you. Many of you talked to Ed and Rebecca, for example, before this weekend. That's who we are. So none of those organisations, Sortition Foundation, My Society, Involve, are specialists in climate change. So to put this assembly together, we've been working with some specialists in climate change, won't be surprised to know. And they are Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Committee on Climate Change, and 3 renowned professors, Jim Watson, Lorraine Whitmarsh, Rebecca Willis. And you'll meet them this weekend. Some of them are speaking this weekend. I just said that. Jim Watson won't be here till next weekend, but over the course of the assembly, you will meet them all. And they've been supported in their role by an advisory panel and an academic panel. There's 20 people on each. I'm not going to list them for you now, but if you want to see them, all the names are on the Climate Assembly UK website. So funding, this is always a question, how is Climate Assembly UK funded? So it's funded by the House of Commons, firstly, out of the Select Committee's research budget. There is additional funding from 2 philanthropic organisations, as we call them, Esme Fairbairn Foundation and the European Climate Foundation. But those 2 organisations have funded on a hands-off basis. So they've had no say whatsoever over the content or the design of the assembly. Okay, so that's enough general introduction. So what are we doing this weekend? So this weekend we have a number of aims, and specifically for today we have these 4. So the first is to give you an opportunity to continue to get to know each other and to begin to explore each other's views in a little more detail. The second is for you to hear and explore information about climate change and some of the key overarching ethical questions, that's what we're focusing on later today, about how to get to net zero. It's also an opportunity for you to have some of your key questions answered today, and also this is meant to be fun, okay? We want you to have a good time, and that is important too. In terms of an agenda, this is what it looks like. So we're starting off with an introduction to the Assembly. That's what I'm doing now. Then we're going to give you a chance to introduce yourselves at your tables. Then we're going to have our first panel, straight into it, our first panel of the weekend, which is about an introduction to climate change and net zero. We'll then prepare for the question and answer session with them. Then you'll have a break. Then we'll come back, we'll do the question and answer session with them, and then we'll have lunch. And then in the afternoon, you've got a table discussion followed by panel 2, the preparation for the Q&A with panel 2, and a Q&A session with them. So tomorrow, you've got fewer panels. It's much more about discussing at your tables, but today there's going to be a lot of information. I should say that whilst we've got breaks and we've got lunch, but obviously if you do need the loo at any time, please do go. So to get to the toilets, they're the ones we were using yesterday. They're one floor down. So you'll see just at the back there, Ed, I don't know if you can point it out, there's some stairs down, just right there inside the doors, just here. Just here, inside the room, there's some stairs down. If you go down them, they take you straight to where the toilets are, basically. So that's the quickest way. If you prefer not to use the stairs, obviously there's the lifts. Just go one floor down, and that's where the loos are. Do go at any time. And I should say there's a more detailed version of this schedule in your packs, if you want to take a look. I think that's all I meant to say about that. So roles this weekend then, I want to do you a bit more of a thorough introduction. So myself and Tim, we're the lead facilitators for the weekend. We'll be standing up here guiding you through what we're doing. It's also the role of the facilitation team more generally to explain what's happening, to do things like make sure we're sticking to time and to make sure we're all sticking to the conversation guidelines as well so that you can all have a really good time here at the assembly. So we're just two of the facilitation team, but you have a member of the facilitation team at your tables too. Table facilitators, could you introduce yourselves to your tables, please?